Welcome to the Long Take Review, where four college professors talk film, providing insight, not assigning homework. I'm your host, Jen Sobchak-Bankard, and I'm here with three viable candidates for The Substance. First, he is The Matrix. It's P.T. McNiff. How's it going, P.T.?
What has been used on one side is lost on the other side. There's no going back. I'm doing well, Jen. How are you?
I'm also doing well. Good to see that you're here in your original form and not not
For
your
now.
Substance form. And he can't escape from himself. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
I'm good, Jen. How are you?
That went on just too long. But your best Dennis Quaid impression to date, I would say.
Well, let me also let listeners behind the curtain and know that I walked around my hometown walking my dog today, practicing making those noises and thinking how to actually recreate the eating the shrimp dipped in butter into a microphone because it's so gross.
It really is. A lot of things in this movie are gross. We'll talk about it. So, last but not least, he hasn't changed a bit. It's Antonio Elefano. How are you doing, Antonio?
One and only thing not to forget. You are one. You can't escape yourself. I'm doing well, Jen.
Note to self, don't get kidnapped by Antonio. Oh my God. This is the most terrifying ransom call I've ever heard. Okay. So those, dear listeners, were all references to the film we are here to review today, The Substance, which is streaming now on Mubi, a fantastic streaming service for art house films. Check it out if you are a cinephile. No free ads though. I'm like, where are subscriptions now that I've said that? If you're listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen the film. And then with a very clear alert, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. Just to give you kind of a taste, it's hard to I didn't write a synopsis for this. I think in part because it kind of defies description in some ways. You have to see it to believe it. But The Substance is a body horror film by director Coralie Farjat. I hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly. I've heard people say Farjit, and I'm like, I don't know what it is. There's no consensus on how to pronounce her name, unfortunately. But, you know, it follows Demi Moore as an aging actress in Hollywood who learns about an exciting new drug called The Substance, and suffice it to say, chaos ensues. Excited to talk about it with everybody here today. But PT, if listeners don't want us to respect the balance after listening to this episode, what can they do?
Well, if Pretty Girls Should Always Smile and you want to smile, you can subscribe to the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcast. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com, but you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, and many more outlets. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at the Long Take Review. And on Letterboxd, our account is at LTRpod. Or you can search for the hashtag LTRpod to see what each of us individually have been watching. Jen?
Thanks, PT. So we'll start, as usual, with the short take. What was your general reaction to The Substance? Now, keep in mind, listeners, that we have all seen this movie at very different times, like in terms of how long ago. Greg saw it a while ago because he is a dedicated cinephile who goes to the theater when things come out. I only saw this movie last weekend. So keeping that in mind, what's everyone's general reaction to The Substance?
I saw it most recently. I saw it 2 days ago. And I'm not a horror fan generally. I'm not a big fan of like jump scare, as PT knows. And I don't I don't find it particularly thrilling to like the mechanics of like a horror movie and just like watching people die. That's not my thing. But horror with like this is horror with a purpose, right? Like horror with like a theme, with what I liked most, I think, this horror movie was that it was horror with easy to follow and really interesting rules, right? There are certain rules about how works, and those rules fit with the theme of the movie, and they bake in to the plot some automatically sort of like simmering tension. Like, once you understand the rules, like how easy it will be to break those rules, and you're wondering about like the consequences of that, really drive your interest through this. So I really enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. um the three of you sort of signed off on it, and you were like, this is you should take a look at it, and I trusted you, and I'm that trust was rewarded. What did you all think?
I loved it quite a bit. This was I was not maybe as surprised. I am more into like these sort of gross movies. I generally don't think of myself as like, well, I like horror movies, but and I won't say I watch as many horror movies as Greg does, because Greg will watch as many movies as possible, and that includes a lot of horror movies. But I do think I'm more of a fan of these kind of movies out of the four of us, and so I co-sign everything Antonio was saying. I think the biggest knock on the movie would be that it is so heavy-handed with its messaging. I think it needs. I don't know if it needs to do that, but I think it didn't hold back the movie for me, because I think that everything like being clear about that, and it being so much about what it is about as directly and repeatedly as it was beneficial to exploring the sci-fi horror aspects of what was going on. So that didn't bother me, but I can see that being an issue. But I fully agree about like enjoying the rules, liking how everything was set up really early, and then being able to sort of track like, okay, well then what's the consequence of that? And you didn't have to wait long to see how all these dominoes sort of fell. I'll also note really incredible acting performances from I think all of the main cast that are at the center of this, and some great references to other horror movies baked in pretty consistently in ways that were enjoyable but not so overbearing in my mind, that it was just like, oh, so you're just trying to be like this other thing. Like it was all sort of folded in enough to make sense thematically with what was going on. Greg, reaching back into the recesses of your memory to when you saw this like 50 movies ago, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I appreciate how you set that up, and I just want to co-sign that I would consider myself not a huge horror fan, but in this project I've been doing where I keep up with the Letterboxd most popular, I've seen a lot of horror. Horror is still performing at the box office, so I've seen a lot of horror this year. And I really had a good time at this. My favorite aspect of it, which probably should be saved till after the spoiler bumper, but I will say it this way, which is I believe this movie makes you a full-on participant in its message and its content in this kind of really tricky, subtle way. So PT is absolutely right that the main message of like the commodification of women's bodies, it could not hit you harder and be more obvious. But the way in which the camera makes you a participant with just like endless ass shots of like there's just everybody on screen, and like I found myself like at first being like, wow, like this is a good time at the movies, then being like, I feel exhausted and so gross by all of this. And I offer that up. I offer myself as like a standard male viewer who is probably thinking like, yeah, this is fun and this is kind of exciting and titillating, and then you're just like, man, we're all just meat and nothing matters in the end. And I think that like a good horror movie, it kind of gives you that sense of existential dread and makes you think about those aspects of it. And I think that is so deliberate and it's really well done. I want to co-sign what PT said. I think a lot has been made of the Demi Moore performance, and it still overwhelmed me with its bravery. And we'll save a little of that discussion. I want to ask a couple things about that for all of you, but I would say for an actress who has been unafraid to let the kind of her body be a key part of her fame, she continues to use that tool masterfully and unashamedly to teach us a thing or two. And I think that's pretty powerful. So definitely recommend. I was the one who said, I don't know, Jen, I know you're squeamish because it's pretty gnarly, and it's pretty gnarly pretty fast. And Jen did a check-in halfway through, and she's like, oh, it's not so bad. I was like, I didn't think Jen was going to make it to the halfway point. I thought you were going to bail out early on. So, Jen, let's hear your full thoughts without me characterizing them.
Yeah, no, I was wary going to this because you had warned me about it. And what I would say is that the concept of it was so captivating to me. Antonio mentioned the rules. Like, what's interesting is, like, I feel like I haven't really heard anyone describe this as sci-fi, but the idea of the substance and the rules that you have to follow and the look of everything and stuff like that really does kind of scratch that sci-fi itch for me. And so I think I was so engrossed in the story and the premise and the production design. Like, this movie looks so sharp and so otherworldly. Like, it's so LA and yet is so otherworldly and not LA that we know. That I almost didn't mind. I mean, it does get really gross. It's when we start shedding body parts, I'm just like, oh, okay. Like, but I think so. Part of it, I think, helped. If I had seen this in a theater, I might have been much more traumatized. Watching it at home, where I could kind of like avert my eyes when I needed to, right? More easily without looking like a 5-year-old child covering my face. Like, but I think partly I learned a little bit more about what I say when I say I'm not a fan of horror movies. I really do think it probably is more the jump scares and kind of the slasher horror genre rather than body horror. Like, I think, because like I think, you know, like the guts of factor of this didn't bother me as much as like a ghost jumping out from around the corner in another movie. You know what I mean? Like, so it's interesting because I think maybe I'm slipping too much into recommendation algorithm by saying that, but that's sort of why I think the purpose and the brilliant use of body horror as a genre to kind of address the themes of this movie is such a perfect marriage that I feel like I sort of like was willing to put up with whatever grossness was to come. Is I think sort of the point. And I also like deeply identified with the Elizabeth Sparkle character, and sort of like I think this movie does such an amazing job of really capturing without over explaining what it's like to be an aging woman in the world, and like how you have to think about yourself in that context, and like the pressures that to like, you know, maintain something that is not, probably, as this movie demonstrates, not natural. Right. I thought I was just really, really good. And again, like, as Greg sort of said, the directing in this is so brilliant because the filmmaking itself so starkly switches between putting you in as a participant of the thing it's critiquing and then quickly switching back to its sort of like narrative perspective as the commentator, right? So yeah, I was a big fan. The third act does get a little too jump the shark for me in moments. I know PT Shicky's had like, how could you? But I was a little like, is this getting too ridiculous? It's taking me out of the story. So we can talk about that in spoiler mode. All right, I've already sort of jump started recommendation algorithm. I don't think that this is limited to just horror fans, but do all of you agree?
I do agree there has to be a level of tolerance for gross stuff. And you know, and I do think that there's and maybe speaks to what you were saying, Jen, that there's the horror area genre that's like being scared of like what's around the corner, what's in the dark, what's gonna like jump out at you. And that's not really this movie. This is more the horror of the consequences of what you are seeing unfold, and that it does get gross and has a lot of there's a lot of different elements too that it eventually does include gore. That may be something that is just a hard no to people, but I think if you're willing to try it, it's worth it's worth it for people, even if they think this isn't my kind of movie. I think there's plenty going on that they can latch onto and enjoy.
My contribution to the algorithm is Black Mirror, Get Out, and Promising Young Woman. So if you like those things, there are elements of
Mm,
this that I think are in this film.
The Instagram aesthetic of Promising Young Woman came to mind a lot
Yeah.
when I watched this. I watched this again like a month ago, like a true cinema aficionado. Again, I am in this for the art. I am not in this for the kind of commerce of it all. And I will say, I happened to watch this with in the same week as I caught up with Death Becomes Her, and that is a perfect
yeah, great
double
double feature.
feature
Mhm.
where it's the exact same themes and they're both LA movies. I was like, "Oh my god, I didn't intend this," but that really was a good counterpoint. I'm actually not positive why I watched Death Becomes Her. I'm
Was
not
it
sure
just
which
Isabella
project.
Rossellini roles that should have been nominated for Oscars? Because
Yeah.
she should have been nominated for an Oscar
I
for Death
I
Becomes
I
Her.
had mixed feelings about that Isabella Rossellini. I'm like, this is an older lady I respect, but also like I have very strong attraction to her in this role. And so but I think maybe it's because it was Frank Oz, right? Is that Frank Oz directed film?
No, that's Robert Zemeckis.
That's Zemeckis? Why am I don't know. I watched it for some reason. And the second one, which I am by far not the first person to point out. About a week after I saw this, I did a Sebastian Stan double feature of The Apprentice and A Different Man. And both feature Sebastian Stan going through a grotesque transformation. But in particular, A Different Man really is the male counterpoint to this in a really fascinating way. And the similarities and differences between the two stories and the way they play out, if read through the lens of this is how men think about our appearance versus how women are forced to think about their appearance, are really good. A Different Man kind of spiked and then completely disappeared as I've read like critical reaction, but I think it's really good. So I'm almost just abusing the recommendation algorithm to recommend a film not being covered, but it is a really good time. It's a really good performance, and always good to see Renee Rensflat from Worst Person in the World. As I believe my entire reaction to that movie was on Letterboxd was crush on Renee Rensflat increases because she's so charming. But Sebastian Stan also good. Jen, what do you recommend?
So the thing I'll add is like if you enjoy The Picture of Dorian Gray, the book, I guess, as opposed to, I don't know if there's actually a good film adaptation that we have of that. I don't think there is. But or any story that involves kind of a Faustian bargain that someone makes that from the get-go is going to go horribly wrong. And this movie's for you. And also like if you were a kid of the 90s and grew up watching Demi Moore, I think there's a lot of subtext that you could bring to this movie for sure.
There was a documentary earlier this year called Brats.
I was just going to reference that too.
Yeah, which is Andrew McCarthy basically making this like very like self-important thing about like, wasn't it so hard that we were all labeled the Brat Pack and it really hurt our careers? And he goes and interviews a bunch of the more successful members of the Brat Pack, and they're like, no, like it was fine. And like Demi Moore is the most like, I don't know, like I think everything's fine, like everything's good. And like I was thinking during parts of this movie of like, no wonder she felt so good. She had this in her back pocket. Like she already knew she was giving the best performance of her career, like in a movie that had not come out when that interview was happening. I just want to add, if we're naming sort of movies things. Antonio said Black Mirror. I'll stick with that color and say Black Swan is another movie that I think this sort of has that like, oh, the younger ingenue coming up to take my spot, and how that may or may not tie into your own stability. And then my double feature, and I'm realizing that it's possible that, Greg, you watched Death Becomes Her because it was in the Letterboxd top whatever, because people were watching it in the lead up to The Substance coming out. Like I could see the Ouroboros of that. But I like my takeaway from it to Antonio's point from his short take was I wanted to pair this with Gremlins as like a please just follow the rules movie. Like if you just follow the rules, this would be fine. And then, you know, you can see how the movies unfold as you watch both of them. Because, you know, if you set up rules in movies, what fun is it if they're just followed the whole time?
Gremlins really messed me up when I was a kid. It really did. Maybe
It's
that's
great.
why I say I don't like horror movies now. That's partly why.
I mean,
Because I'm like, these things are supposed to be cute. Why are we perverting cuteness?
exposure therapy, I recommend watching it again. Maybe don't show your kids because they're not ready.
No. Yeah.
But it's good. It's a fun movie.
Okay.
I was also just thinking about Alex Garland's Men, which Antonio mentioned Get Out, and that was kind of pushed forward as like, you know how Get Out helped us rethink race? Men will help us rethink genre. And it really didn't. Or sorry, gender, not genre. Gender. It's getting late. Gender. And it really didn't. And I think it was because it was a man and trying to like tell about female horror and the female experience. And so this would be a much better version of what that movie attempted. Nobody saw that. That's fine. Us A24 bros. We do it right. We see them all. Jen,
That had
take us out.
Jesse Buckley, right?
Yeah, it did. And the whole final sequence is like, you know what's horrifying? Childbirth. Let's make a monster out of childbirth. And it's very male.
All right. On that note, I think we are more than ready to go into spoiler mode. If you have not seen The Substance, and the other thing I'll add is like maybe just see it because it's like seems to be the cool movie everyone wants to talk about. You know what I mean? Like it definitely has that kind of monoculture feel to it. So if you want to get in on some water cooler conversations about grossness and the patriarchy, then get in on this. So yeah, go see the Substance. It's on Mubi, really easy to stream, and come back and rejoin us for the rest of the conversation. So I mentioned in my short take that the one place that this movie started to falter for me was the ending, because it just goes so hard. It's like it gets so extreme where she becomes this kind of like crazy Frankenstein amalgamation of all these body parts. She's both Elizabeth Sparkle and Sue, but then it's like really super as grotesque as you could possibly make it. Was that too much for all of you? PT shook his head earlier. What does everyone else think?
Not too far for me, but I think because not only did she break the rules, she broke the rules in like ways that I didn't anticipate her breaking the rules. Right when the copy gets the activator, like based on the science of the substance, right? Then like something really terrible has to happen there, right? So I feel like I was set up for a really awful like operatic ending, and that's what I got. So it didn't surprise me. I mean, look, this isn't really my genre. I can't say that like I was like thrilled by any of that necessarily, but like it was. I wasn't surprised by it, and I thought it was like a perfect ending based on what this film was.
Yeah, I mean, I will also. I mean, I don't think it needs defending necessarily, but I will say to your point, Jen, that I think that there's that whole sequence could probably have been trimmed a little bit. Like there's like maybe a little bit too long spent luxuriating in like the gushing blood in the theater, or even sort of like the process of the monstro getting back to the studio. That you know, maybe it could have been tightened a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I thought it was incredible. That's what I was like. I think this is good. I don't know exactly how they're going to like wrap this up. Like that was for me an incredible direction. This sort of like super grotesque I mean, a lot of the movie is very Cronenbergian. This like structure of the monster with all the different faces reminded me of different elements, different moments in The Thing, when the thing is taking on a new form and it's caught sort of in the middle, and it ends up with like it's not fully formed the new faces of the new creature it's taking on, and so I love that, and has some really funny little moments. And yeah, to Antonio's point, I was like, oh, she like I was not thinking strongly enough, I guess, because when it was like, oh, Margaret Qualley's gonna substance herself to like make a copy of a copy, I was like, what's the multiplicity character that's going to show up here? Like, is there going to be a younger, is this going to be like, a 10-year-old? Is there going to be like another actress? Like, what exactly is going to be the younger version of the Margaret Qualley character? And like, would it be a surprise cameo from someone else? And the fact it went into this weird, monstrous, like mega being of like all these different versions of what this person might think of themselves, but like mashed together in this grotesque way. I loved it, but I'm a sicko. Greg, what did you think?
It was a little over the top for us normies. I mean, I think the description Jen mentioned is right for me, that it just kept going. I think if so there's this thing, I think I heard Conan explain once. Conan took a really bad fall on his show one night and got like a concussion because he hit his studio floor. And I remember very clearly, he paused the video when he had slipped and was like horizontal. And he was explaining how like that's a moment where he still in his head was like, oh, I got this. Like I can stand back up. Like it's no problem. And like that spirit energized that last piece where Demi Moore, Elizabeth is like, oh, I still got this. Like I can recover from this. I'll just put a bit of sexy lingerie on this body, and like it'll all work out. And I really did like that. And then I do think we should talk at some point about, you have to buy into this being set in like this fictional Hollywood that is somehow still the 1980s, where like the New Year's Eve show is such a big deal, and all the executives will be wearing tuxes in the audience and hooting and hollering to.
That looks like a high school auditorium somehow.
Yeah. There are a lot of leaps in that, but I did like, I wanted those male characters to get their comeuppance, and it was fun to see that happen. But honestly, the piece that will stick with me is I really loved the bookend of, we started on her star getting disrespected, and we go back at the end to her weird starfish blob face kind of crawling out and lying on the star. I mean, it's not subtle not in any stretch of the imagination, but like I got so excited when I realized that's what we were doing at the end, and I thought that to me, that felt to me like that's why Demi Moore took this part. That like she wanted to say this and she wanted to do this, and I completely agree with PT's comments about the Bratz documentary. I was gonna say, like, if you watch that and you were like, Demi Moore is all right, you can watch this and be like, Demi Moore is all right. Like she gets it entirely, and owns it in such an important way that I really liked that piece of the ending. I really probably could have skipped the theater or the studio part along the way.
Jen, I will note there's a reason the studio looks like a high school auditorium, and that's because it's a reference to the end of Carrie.
Oh, that makes sense.
So, which is why
also makes sense why I wouldn't know that.
Right, but it's like, oh, right, that's why they spend like 7 minutes just gushing blood on people, because that's the end of Carrie. Spoilers for a 50-year-old movie.
I will say the thing I really liked in that scene were the callbacks to other comments made by men earlier in the movie. Like the casting director who's like, oh, I wish her boobs were in the middle of her face instead of that nose. And that it's made literal. It's like, we're giving you what you wanted, right? And it's like there's a breast protruding from a super weird spot, like a bulge that nobody wants, right? And so that part I really appreciated, because yes, it is kind of on the nose, but in a way that I think is necessary to be like, no, we're not just kind of like making this grotesque monster run around and terrorize everybody for fun, right? It is like, it's a comeuppance, as sort of Greg had said, So there was a Letterboxd review that I saw that just said, and Greg will probably be the only one who gets this reference, just says moisturize me. And that is a Doctor Who reference, because there's a Doctor Who episode during David Tennant's run where there's an alien that is like someone, I think the implication is she's gotten so much plastic surgery that she's just a sheet of skin,
Mhm.
right? Left on a no? Okay, Greg, go ahead.
It's
been
not
while
a
since
woman.
I've seen it.
It's not a woman. We know who it is. It's Jack Harkness, right? That's the end of Jack
Oh.
Harkness's storyline, way down the line from when we know him.
I
But the
forgot about
point
that.
is, there's vanity, and so yeah, it's a thing about vanity that in the end, the face of this product ends up just being a face stretched on a hanger, and we moisturize it. So yes, it's a good joke. I like the joke.
But that's what the starfish on the Hollywood Star
Yeah.
reminded me of. It's like, it looks a lot like that. But my point is, like, for me, it pushed it a little too far in those final scenes, because it sort of ratcheted it up into a level of, because I associate Doctor Who with being very campy, but it's on purpose, right? It's like, and so I think that level of campiness wasn't quite commensurate with the movie I've been watching up until that point for me. So that, I don't know. It's again, it like slightly took me out of it, where I was like, like, this is getting kind of ridiculous. We get it. But yeah.
I think that's fair. I don't think it's to me, it wasn't the ridiculousness of it. It was more that, like, it went a little long. Like, I think it was
Mhm.
it was timed out for a big audience in a full theater reacting and, like, you know, laughing and maybe like being grossed out by what was unfolding. And when you watch it either in a relatively empty movie theater, as it sounds like Greg had, or you know, at home on your couch, you're just sort of like, yeah, no, I get it. Like, that's what's happening. Like, okay. And again, like, I mean, I'm the one most inclined to like that. But I still was just like, this could probably have been like 2 or 3 minutes shorter. Like, this final, like, you know, dozen minutes of the movie could probably have been like 9 or 8 minutes instead. And it would have been just as effective, maybe even more so.
So the title card at the end is Monstro
Elizasu.
Elizasu. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the title cards for the other two acts were Elizabeth and Sue.
Well, Elizabeth Sparkles and then Sue.
And then
Sue never has
Sue.
a last name.
That's right. It's very Cher. But so, like, what do we read into that? Because at first I was like, is this a reference I'm supposed to know? Because it seems so linguistically specific. But is it really just to say that the combination of the two of them is the most monstrous thing or something? You know what I mean? Like, am I overthinking it?
I just love when you see PT making his "I'm Googling" face.
I am Googling.
Because I'm like, oh, good, I don't have to Google.
So,
You know what I mean? Like, because like, what's the whale's name in Pinocchio? I was like, is it that? Like, is it? I don't know.
The take I have, and this is because we did our Alien Romulus episode, and I did too much of a dive into the academic study of Alien, is there's an academic named Barbara Creed who has a book/theory called The Monstrous Feminine, which is about how horror movies use these grotesque creatures to show like the fear that especially men have, but you know, anyone could have, of like concepts of femininity. So I think it's taking that scholarly analytical concept and bringing it into the text of the movie, that it's like the monstrous is when like sort of this woman has had has been able to use this substance to try to get this goal of hers that's really not her goal so much as it's her desire to fulfill the goal of men in the world, to look as young and as supple and whatever as possible, and be back in that age of her life. And then that person is like, oh no, like my body's failing me through aging, but it's really, you know, the too much time being spent in this process. Let me try to fix that again. And it's bringing up the monstrousness of it all. So, you know, I don't know if that's something that everyone should know, because how many people have looked up Barbara Creed? Maybe this was designed to come out after an Alien movie, and they hoped everyone had just been reading up on their scholarship around xenomorphs. But That's my take on it, is that it's like the culminate in the way that you were saying, oh, this is what, it's showing a grotesque version of what all these men had said they wanted. Like, pretty girls should always smile, so we have that like perma scream smile Demi Moore face on like the back shoulder of the character. That like, this is like, well, this is what you get. It's monstrous if you actually do all the things that men tell you should do, and that men say that they want. It's going to create this like crazy, disgusting beast.
So my next question is, why is this story best told through the body horror genre? Because I think a lot of the critics' reactions I've heard is that it's like both a brilliant execution of body horror for the horror people who love it, but at the same time has this kind of like prestige to it because of the themes and how the horror kind of interacts with the themes. So what are our thoughts on that? Like, how do you think that this story can only be told in this way?
I think it's completely appropriate. I think that body horror. There's the obvious like meaning of body horror in terms of like the grotesque things that happen in the film and how she's transformed. But there's also the horror that Elizabeth Sparkles has in her own aging, and in her own constant comparisons to her and to young people. And like at the beginning of the movie, when things start to go awry and she has like her fingers messed up, right? Like her finger is like old and has like a spot, that she can't see anything but that, right? You can imagine a scenario in which like human being could like live with just like that one like imperfection, because otherwise she looks like amazing. She's Demi Moore. She looks incredible, right? But you know that is unacceptable to her, right? To the point that she continues on what is clearly it's not going to end well for her. But I think that that's the smart part of the movie, right? And I'm okay that the themes and that nothing is executed particularly subtly, because it's not a genre that is subtle. So I think that even though it's sort of the same point that sort of blasted at me again and again and again, the only complaint I really have about the sort of execution of the movie was the sort of like the sound, the static, and the occasional, the volume goes out, the volume comes up. Maybe this was because like I'm watching it late at night. Gee, my wife was like, I don't want to watch that. And I was like, fine. My kids were sleeping and I didn't want them to wake up. So like I kept having to adjust the volume to hear it, and then not whatever. But that's my only real complaint about it. I thought that it did everything that it set out to do, is enough for me, right? What about the rest of you?
This is such a like hard movie to be alone as a dude on a couch watching. like your late night, I'm secreting the substance, just like sounds like trying to watch scrambled cable TV as a preteen or some such. But maybe that's what the static was supposed to like ignite in our brains. I do think this has to be body horror, and it's because I'm going to steal PT Smart comment earlier about the Ouroboros of it all, right? It is the horror of the body that creates this situation for Elizabeth. And, I think I'm not an expert on body horror, but I understand it to essentially be an externalization of inner kind of turmoil and unsettled attitudes. And that's exactly what this is. I mean, the course of the movie, her arc is just her slowly becoming as monstrous as she is on the inside. This has that twist to it in my mind that that's not her choice, right? This is what the world has demanded of her and of other actresses. I mean, I'm not the LA guy on the podcast. You three live this every day. I understand. But as I understand body horror, that's not always the case. That it's often a choice, and there is some choice involved here. But it just feels like it's the external pressure that's like, it's not just she wants to feel pretty; it's that she feels that society has told her she only has worth while she, is there. Again, in the fog of my memory, that's why it is interesting, because she goes on that date right, with the high school guy, and
Well, she
like,
doesn't.
Well, yeah.
or,
She
or she
arranges a
doesn't
date.
show.
Yeah,
She
she
breaks.
sets up the date,
Yeah,
and then she's too neurotic getting ready, thinking she doesn't look good enough,
Mhm.
right.
that she never
But that
makes it.
like that, I mean,
So
that's a
sad.
beautiful like road not taken for the film to include, right? That there was somebody, yes, he was attracted to her because she's famous and because she's beautiful, but there was like somebody who saw worth in her, but she just wanted to appeal to that. And what I really love too, just because I can't get enough of this Demi Moore performance, my favorite scenes of her are the when we're in the heat of the 1 week on, 1 week off, and she's just like devouring a chicken in front of her television. Like, of course, everybody's going to talk about like her bravery at showing her entire body at that age is something that Hollywood does not tend to reward and allow. And yet, to me, it's like, but she didn't just do that. She got super gross. And I just love those moments and like being, every cliche stereotype of like a shut-in, recluse, I thought was just really brilliantly done. So those are the moments where that are not body horror, but are kind of the ones that haunt me the most. It's like, because
You
there,
can
but
see
for the
yourself in
grace
them.
of God, go I will, if I get laid off, you're gonna find me with a rotisserie chicken and my
Well,
television.
and you can trace it back to her parting gift from the studio that they all chipped in to get her is a French cookbook, right? As if telling her, okay, you've turned 50. The only thing is that is appropriate for you to do right now is become Julia Child, right? Like, and so it really is kind of like, again, you're right. Everything can be sort of traced back to the expectations and pressures put upon her. For me, I think horror as an intellectual exercise appeals to me the most when it's kind of excising our own anxieties and fears and kind of putting them out there and confronting them directly. And I feel like that's what this movie does best through the body horror. It's like the sense of loss of control and what we can and can't control with our bodies, and how like her desperation for something like a something like the substance is born out of this idea of like, well, society tells me I have to control my aging and stop it as much as I can, but at the same time the horror is like oftentimes you can't, just as like the Sue starts involuntarily losing her fingernails and losing her teeth, like that's aging. Like, is like you don't have control over what happens to your body over time. You can only do so much, right? You can only and there are no easy answers. There's no amount of product that will stop time, right? Like, so to me, I thought that's why the story it just made so much sense. I'm like, oh, like the best way to kind of address these themes is to get them out there so openly, so directly, so in your face, right? I think in my Letterboxd review, I called this movie Hostile because it is sort of very hostily being like, is this what you wanted, society? Like,
But not
yeah.
torture porn like Hostel.
No.
Different kind of horror movie. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what all of you are saying. I think that, these themes could be addressed and touched upon in a different genre, but it doesn't feel like this was a movie that started as, I want to talk about these themes, and as they worked on it, they eventually fell into it being body horror. They were like, let's use body horror to show like the implications of this, and to sort of make real this sort of question of the sort of abjection of aging women's bodies, or really any woman's body in society and in entertainment in particular. And so you use that as a jumping off point. And so yeah, it would just be an entirely different project if it wasn't in this genre.
All right, I think to dig into this a little bit more, I'm going to shift us into the rhetorical situation, a segment in which we look at a film through the lens of our academic experience. I think this film in particular really is begging for a rhetorical situation. So all four of our regular co-hosts are writing professors, so we like to have this section of the episode dedicated to making connections to our experience as scholars and teachers. In the teaching of writing, the rhetorical situation refers to any contextual factors that influence composing and interpretation. I have some that I put in our outline that we could talk about, but I want to open it up first. Like, what did you think of for rhetorical situation for this film?
I would love to say I thought of it earlier in advance, but because we were talking about it, it is that monstrous feminine and the that as a sort of subsection of the sort of general critical theory of objection, which is sort of being outside or pushed outside of the norms and rules of society and morality, and how that can be be a key element in kind of all body horror. I think is this sort of even if it's just something as widespread as a concept as a zombie, is just like, well, you're not real, like you're not alive, you're undead, you're not alive, you're not dead, you're undead, you're somewhere in between, you're outside of our standard binary. What does that mean? And this as another way of showing that, and I think not to give away stuff that's already in the document, I think some of the things that you had in here, Jen, tie in well with that sort of that idea of what's monstrous, and how that becomes in this story a self-fulfilling prophecy, because it isn't that someone comes up and is like, if you want to keep your job, you need to use the substance. It's she's like, I'm losing my job, I'm not gonna have this, I need this, so she chooses it. But is it really a free choice if she's in this structure, in this society, and in doing so ends up eventually pushing herself outside of it by becoming both the monster that old Elizabeth becomes, who's this like crone Skeksis looking thing that is just like lurking around in the world, and then also eventually the true like monstro Elizasu.
Side note, I love how even when she becomes the kind of crone figure, still rocking the yellow coat with the huge oversized sunglasses. Like that'll solve so many of your problems. It's great.
Must have been a huge Halloween costume at like adult parties this year.
Oh yeah.
That had to be a popular
I was
one.
not cool enough to be at a party with that costume. But I can see it. I can picture it. Sorry, Antonio.
It came to Mubi too late. So nobody knew, right? Halloween? Like next year.
That seems weird.
It arrived on Halloween, but a lot of the parties were the weekend before, I would have thought.
Almost all the people that I know were one of the 3 from Challengers for Halloween, but that wasn't the point I was going to say.
Wow.
Yeah. So
awkward group costume. Like
yeah, it is. But I got a lot of pictures of just like, oh, it's Challengers. I'm like, okay. But I want to talk about the contextual factor that I thought about was the packaging of celebrities, and how like eds or whatever, they know what they want ahead of time, that they're not looking for someone to surprise them or to be themselves. They're looking for these specific features because they believe they understand what like the American people want. And the person that came to mind for me was one of my favorite musicians is Fiona Apple, and I love her music, and I love the evolution of her music. But her very first, I think, music video was sort of infamously was a great song, "Criminal," but it was her in her underwear, doing the things that like other young women in that time, in that era in music did, and it was sort of like a standard sort of package for a very unstandard artist. And so I think that a lot of her career and a lot of her music since then has been in sort of relation to being packaged in that way, and to having her voice sort of manipulated into being something that she wasn't. And so part of what I love about every new album, she comes up with an album like I think like every 7 years, like it takes some time, but like they're always so and just so much depth to like to how she sort of synthesized life in a way that you could never imagine. I don't know how old she was at the time when I think she did win a Grammy, maybe even for that. But like the 20-something or maybe even teenage version of her. And it makes me think about like all of the like people who are packaged in that way who never get to evolve in the way that Fiona Apple evolved. So I'll start there. That was an interesting comparison. What about the rest of you?
I was thinking a lot about the feature film Megalopolis, and how there's this really, I think to call it half baked is generous. Plot line about the virgin sacrificed in the
Yeah.
city for the good of society, and I think everything Antonio just said would teach Francis Ford Coppola a thing or two, and also is present in this film that, like, I think because of my exact age, I always think of Britney Spears in this regard, right? Like, who was packaged up as a celebrity and was packaged up, and to pull along Francis Ford Coppola, was packaged up with her virginity, and that was something that mattered to her celebrity, and this kind of endless cycle of ingenue to sex pot to slut to ingenue to sex pot to slut, and this way in which we all continue to participate in it. And when this film, in all the ways that were just articulated, kind of makes you revel in that, it's not like any of us are like, wow, this is the first time I've ever thought of that. We're like, yes, but I'll take that Us Weekly, please. Right? Like, we just continue to participate in the cycle and the chewing up of and spitting out of particularly young women in our society. Jen's, really graphic Harris Dickerson comments aside, I just can't believe. Oh wait, did you edit out the 20 minutes you did on his face in the Blitz episode? Sorry, Jen.
It's uncalled for.
But I do think I think and I want to use this to translate it over to Jen, because I don't have the critical equipment to know exactly what I'm saying about, but I'm enough of a go woke, go broke male to know that the male gaze is present on a lot of our art and our culture. And what I loved about this film is that phrase came to mind because, as I said in my opening, the camera 100% made you a participant in this. And, I was surprised and not surprised that it was a female director, because I feel like this is like the greatest stuff a rolled up pair of socks in your underpants move a director has made, where it's like, I'll perform kind of that male gaze in unsettling ways and see how it feels and take it for a walk and create something truly monstrous. And I found it very effective. So Jen, could you give us the actual theory and not the weird metaphors of stuffing socks in your underpants?
Yeah, sorry, I was too busy trying to figure out how I'm going to edit around that, but I don't think I can. All right, so Greg mentioned the male gaze. So the big theorist in film theory that really revolutionized film theory was Laura Mulvey's theory of the male gaze, from the big work that usually gets quoted as Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. And she kind of walks you through how cinema is based on scopophilia, right? The pleasure in looking, and in general, right? And that this is a very reductive summary of what she's saying, because it's like many, many pages I'm trying to distill into like a 30-second thing. But she basically is sort of saying that the fundamentals of filmmaking, at least in mainstream Western cinema, is the patriarchy is kind of built into the camera work that kind of makes the scopophilia inherently misogynistic, right? Like that. And so I did bring a quote. I don't usually do this, but I feel like to kind of better it, because I think my paraphrasing is only going to take us so far. But she says, and this is probably, if you find like a PDF online of this article, or essay, that this is the one that's most likely going to be underlined by a grad student or something like that. But it says, in a world ordered by sexual imbalance, pleasure in looking has been split between active male and passive female, meaning that kind of like the camera is identifying with the male gaze, right? That we're looking, when we look at female characters in films, it's like as if we were a heterosexual man. The determining male gaze projects its fantasy onto the female form, which is styled accordingly. In their traditional exhibitionist role, women are simultaneously looked at and displayed, with their appearance coded for strong visual and erotic impact, so that they can be said to connote to be looked atness, right? That they exist as objects of our scopophilia as opposed to actual character. I think the sentence right after that is like that they are the vessels of meaning and not makers of meaning. I'm paraphrasing that, but that women can't have their own agency. They're basically in films for us to look at them. And I feel like the brilliance of and I mentioned this a little bit in my short take, but the brilliance of what this film is doing is that it so starkly contrasts and really illustrates the difference between the filming as the male gaze and what it might look like to not be. Because I think when we cut back and forth between, especially between the scenes where Sue is filming her show, right, the Pump It Up numbers, right, those are filmed like all the angles, the camera angles, the when and where the camera chooses to zoom in, what the use of close-ups, all of that stuff is meant to just like objectify Sue, and to the point of like of absurdity, right? And whereas when we cut back to Elizabeth, it really illustrates there's like the thing you hear older women say a lot of the time is like once a woman turns 50, they become invisible, like that no one wants to look at them anymore. And the filmmaking, because the lighting gets just darker, the color palette, I think it becomes less saturated, like it's just such a visual stark contrast that you really get that sense of like, oh, what is filmmaking that is indulging the male gaze look like versus not. And the thing that I thought of when I was watching this, which I don't know if anyone got to watch these music videos, but they have to be direct inspiration. In particular, like the sequence where Sue decides to build the like secret closet in the bathroom, right, to store Elizabeth. Even then, it's sort of like filming her using the power tools in her underwear or something. You know what I mean? In a way that is like very like. And so I was like, what does this remind me of? This reminds me of something that was popular when I was in college. And it's a music video of a song. I think it's like a one-hit wonder probably, but it's Benny Benassi's Satisfaction. And the music video, if you lived in a college dorm room I actually don't know what year it's from, but during the early 2000s, like this video probably was something you were forced to watch by by someone being like, look at this video. And because I think that's what happened to me. And like, it's basically a bunch of women who are like oiled up in either short shorts or bikinis and using various power tools. And I was just like, if this is not the male gaze, I don't know what is. You could argue that it's being satirical, that music video is being satirical, because it also has like instructional text of the power tools. Like that's what you're supposed to be paying attention to. Does anyone remember this?
I vaguely, but I
Okay.
will admit I had to click through the video and have it start, be like, oh yeah, this was, I'm a few years older, so I was out of college. No one like forced it upon me, but I was just like, yeah, that feels like a thing that was around, and I didn't like it. Because of course I have too much respect for women
Right. You're immune
like
to
a
such
video
things.
such as this.
The other more recent music video is Call on Me, which I'm sure once you start listening, I'll put these links to these videos in the show notes, just to spread the joy, the discovery that clearly this must be, or things like this must be a reference for the style of filmmaking in those Pump It Up sequences. But yeah, that one is kind of like a weird perversion of the 80s fitness videos. It's like both modernizing it and kind of making it more like, and I think we see that between the Elizabeth Sparkles version of a fitness workout video. By the time we get to Sue's version, it's not even actually about the exercising anymore. And it's just about looking at her while she's dancing, right? Like, so I don't know. Make of that what you will.
It was still about the exercise to me. I don't know what's wrong with you, Perfect. I was like, yeah, well, but I want to work my well, I will just say I did not know these specific references you shared, but I was 100% thinking about especially the heyday of MTV. And I do remember as an undergraduate when a feminist sociology professor was like, MTV is a bunch of like really perverted anti-woman text. And I was like, oh, that's why when I was 14, I got really into MTV. And, like it is like an unlockable thing, but it's certainly and I think that sometimes gets kind of blamed on one genre, particularly hip hop sometimes. But I do think it's kind of pervasive of MTV culture. And all of these kind of old fashioned touches to the Hollywood of this movie feel like peak MTV. Again, the New Year's Eve show. Like, who would even think of that as a thing anymore? And anyway, so I think I think you're very much correct that that's just in the DNA of this film. And what have we heard over and over again about, directors who cut their teeth on music videos and then ascend into Hollywood? So yes, that DNA should still be there and is continuing on. And then you add on the Instagram aesthetic, which I mentioned earlier, and it's like, yep, it was misogyny all along, right? That's just it.
Yeah, and I want to add to both what you're just saying, Greg, and also to Jen, your well shared point about that male gaze theory. Is I think that also ties into why there are so many explicit references to earlier horror movies that are in this. I mean, there's like sort of ones that feel, again, like there's The Thing by John Carpenter. There's the David Cronenberg movies. You have the like close up on Sue's mouth in When She Talks, which is very Videodrome. And then there's like a fly that lands when Dennis Quaid does his like shrimp eating, and that's very much like The Fly, which is also sort of what the crone is in that is in that direction, the sort of the Brundlefly direction of things. But you have Carrie, directed by Brian De Palma. The office, that hallway outside the studio is coded as The Shining. There's the red walls. It has the carpet from the Overlook Hotel. The wave of blood comes down after the Carrie auditorium scene, and the bathroom is the bathroom where Jack Torrance and Grady speak in The Shining. And so these are all very famous horror movies by very famous male directors who are not all necessarily, very few of those are necessarily about, the male gaze or sexualizing women, but they're not a female perspective. They're a male perspective telling these kind of stories. And even if it's something like Carrie, which is a story about a girl and a girl coming of age is sort of wrapped into that, it's a male directed movie based on a Stephen King book, another guy. So it's like, who gets to tell these stories and who has gotten to do this? And also coming back to Greg's point of like, this has to be a female director doing this, not just because she like out male gazes the male gaze, but she also like takes in all of these establishing influences that surround the genre and surround the culture of these kind of movies, and represents it and repackages it as this just accumulation of disasters for women to have to navigate and exist in and try to survive. And this is the terrible result of someone trying to do that.
Well, the question I think that remains is, will the Academy go for this?
Will other men reward this?
Right. Well,
will the men depicted in this film reward this film?
Oh, right. Wait, is it going to hit too close to home? That's an interesting question.
Well, first, music us.
So I want to get us started here by saying, for the record, I think I was wrong. So what I mean by that is when one aspires to become an Oscar pundit, like I do, oftentimes it's actually better to not watch the movie. Sorry, Greg. Because you get your own personal bias, sort of like especially if you really love a movie or really hate it. Like if you have a strong reaction to a film, that oftentimes can color, well, that can't possibly get Oscars, or like, oh, this has to get all the Oscars, right? And so I was pretty confident just hearing kind of other critics talking about the substance and that and their hope that, oh, wouldn't it be great if this could get into Best Picture? Couldn't Demi Moore get Best Actress? I really scoffed and I was like, oh, this is just hope dicting. Like, this is just people being like, wouldn't it be cool if the Academy were edgy enough to nominate this like crazy gonzo horror film, right? But now that I've seen it, I get it. Like, I get why this could become a thing, especially Demi Moore's performance. So I'm very humbled after watching this movie in terms of my Oscar punditry, and I'm like, oh, I should have just watched the movie. So this to me is the case where like now I'm like, oh, watching the movies actually helps. because now I understand why this would get nominated, because like I really appreciated what it was doing. So what do you all think? Like, what is this actually viable as an Oscar contender?
So it's almost like it's not necessarily about moving pieces on the board, but about actually enjoying movies. And
Maybe, I don't know.
Sorry, I'm taking Greg's role as loving it for the art. I think it's possible. I do think, it's gross, and that could definitely be a deterrent. But between the expanded academy and between the sort of the themes of it and how present and obvious the themes are. I mean, again, it does begin with this like construction of a Hollywood star, like Hollywood loves Hollywood, and they're just like, ooh, it's about us. Like, great. And even though like it quickly can get into things being gross, it does have enough time that I think people could get sucked in before the real kind of horror elements come into play. So I unlike a movie where maybe like say a Babylon where there's whatever, the elephant pooping or pissing within the first like 6 minutes, and people might be like, I'm not doing this for 3 hours. Like, this takes a little while to get to it being gross, and you might be roped into it. So yeah, I will just note to go to my old reliable Gold Derby. This is quote unquote in on the predictions. Like it's at nomination for 2 categories right now. Demi Moore is not one of those. It's in 5th at original screenplay, and it's number 1 for makeup and hairstyling. So, I wouldn't be surprised to see it at those. Like, it's in that sort of weird original screenplay, has like a couple strong contenders and then a bunch of sort of it. Like number 6 is Saturday Night, which I don't think anyone thinks is going to resurge and suddenly like get in there. So, it has this buzz, it has this momentum. Is it then possible that Demi Moore could rise up into the actress thing? She has to jump over a few people to do that. I don't believe we've said the name yet at this point, but Margaret Qualley as Sue in supporting actress, I think has a shout as well. In a weird, like, people being like, oh, she was the hot one in the movie. Like, that was the part I liked. That, like, she might get a push up there. And the other thing I will say is, I've already now forgotten exactly how to pronounce the director's name, Coralie Farge. But she's the like top ranked woman on the Gold Derby. Like, if they are like, we should nominate a woman because that's, not because that's like a crass way of thinking about it, but she's in the top 8 of best director. And if there are people who think they should nominate a woman, like, it looks like she would be the beneficiary at this point. So all that might then lead to picture as well. So suddenly this could suddenly have like 5 or 6 nominations and a lot of positive feelings from people who like it.
I liked this movie, but I think this is makeup, and then that's probably it. The screenplay, I think, is a lot of dialogue in the movie, and as clever as like the rules of the movie are, as clever as like the concept of the movie is, I don't know that it's like a great example of like screenwriting necessarily. I mean, I don't know, like line by line screenwriting at least. And Demi Moore, I think that she's really great in it too, where I can imagine we'll get a lot of testimonials about people saying that like they watched the screener, they watched like, I don't know, 30 minutes of the screener and then turned it off. And then that was that. I feel like this is going to be on a list of like snubs. Like Demi Moore will be on the list, like the first person on the snubs for Best Actress. So unfortunately, I think that's what I anticipate. Greg, what do you think?
Walking out of the theater, my immediate thought was, this is too weird. Like, it's just not gonna play at all.
Yeah.
And that's not that doesn't speak to my enjoyment of the film. It doesn't speak to the quality. It's so far outside that box. I think it's too far for the Academy to go with it. I would like to maintain some hope for Demi Moore because I think it could be a kind of career award, right? That she seems to be well liked, as I understand Hollywood, as the one non-LA resident on the podcast again. You all just get like live stock up, stock down on every celebrity. That's how LA works. It's like
Our
delivered through
daily
power.
Q rating updates. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I will say that, and I alluded to this before, so I want to make sure I say it, is I would not count myself as a Demi Moore fan. Jen, you alluded to like how if you just were alive in the 90s, she was on TV. I would say she was always on HBO. And so like I didn't see her for a long time, right? Because a lot of these movies didn't make it at least in their full form to like TNT. They got left out. But the big picture
This
when
is some
they talk
ghost
about
erasure right here.
oh,
Like
sorry.
And A Few Good Men. I mean, that's a TNT staple.
No, that's true.
to a lesser degree, G.I. Jane, like that. I don't know. Like that was a big. That movie was a big
Keep
deal.
my wife's name out your mouth. That's all I associate with that now. So I will just say, the big picture made me really realize that this is not an aberration or a like she stepped so far of her comfort zone, but made me realize that Demi Moore's fame has always been on her wielding the power of her body. And I really came to appreciate that. And essentially they tracked from Indecent Proposal as like, young ingenue. She looks so incredible. She's worth $1 million to sleep with. So says Robert Redford. And then to, I believe it's a Vanity Fair photo of her nude when pregnant. That really kind of is cited as breaking down the boundaries of, pregnant women. We Live in Time came to mind, right? I mean, that's fake pregnant, but like the way the female body was just kind of shown in its natural beauty at that stage. And then striptease as that kind of look, I'm going to use gross quotes, past my prime, but I'm going to use my body and still show I'm totally gorgeous and all those things. Kind of was her owning her. It was almost her owning her Elizabeth Sparkle moment, right? I mean, because she's well past 50, and so she's calling it 50. I don't know my Demi Moore lifetime when these movies came out, where it came. I think she wasn't 50 by
She's
Striptease.
62 currently.
Okay. So and striptease is at least like 30 years ago, I think, at this point. But like all of that just kind of demonstrated to me that this is somebody who looked at the misogyny that she faced from the get-go and said, if that's what you want of me, I'm going to wield it and do something with that power. And I think if the Academy bought into that and really leaned into that kind of social progressive version of this her fame, her career, I can see some awards going that way. I do think there's some stronger contenders at the moment though, but that's just again, as a lover of art, that's what I think. Jen, as somebody who loves the horse race, what are you thinking?
I mean, you're all really bringing me back down to earth here on this one. I was like, after watching this movie, I was like, oh wow, like how wrong I was to like totally dismiss this. I mean, I do think it will be an interesting test case to see, because I feel like every year I try to be more conservative of like the Academy won't do that. They're not going to go for that. But I think more and more these days we're being surprised, right? Like Everything Everywhere All at Once, everyone was like, there's no way that kind of genre crazy time hopping movie would, with the things that are in that movie, would make it. But the Academy embraced it and it gained momentum and had a lot of passion behind it. So I'm not ruling it out. Demi Moore, the career argument for narrative for Demi Moore would be very strong because she has not been nominated for any Oscars, I believe. She's gotten Golden Globe nominations, I think, right? But no Oscars. Love. So, I mean, if the Academy wanted to virtue signal, another thing that they love to do, to be like, we acknowledge that we have a problem with beauty standards, right? And we should really deal with that, right? And we love Demi Moore and how terrible it is that she's never gotten an Oscar nomination. So, I think if that's blows the right way, then we could be onto something. It did win the screenplay award at Cannes. So there is awards precedence for the screenplay. I agree with Antonio that when I think of what works really well about this movie, it's not necessarily the writing. Because yes, it has a clever concept and the conception of it is very smart, but at the same time, there's not a ton of dialogue, right? Other than that guy being like, respect the ballots, right? Like, and so just respect it. Click. Like,
Yeah.
like there's not a lot of it's not a very wordy screenplay, right? And that's not typically what gets rewarded. It's not Anatomy of a Fall, right?
But I do feel like my perception of screenplay is usually when it's like we have a weird movie, like we have a movie that doesn't really fit, and even with the expanded 10 Best Picture lineup, like that's usually like, well, these are 10 movies that like we can all sort of agree on that have some accumulation of nominations in other categories. Some of them are all below the line. Some of them might be more acting based. But when we have this weird movie, I don't know, like that's a space for a movie like this that maybe only doesn't have a position anywhere else because there are 10 slots across the 2 screenplay nominations. I will just say, and I know like, we don't want to belabor the time too much, but just to look at the field right now of our top 10 in the actress, is we have the 2 breakout younger performers in sort of movies that are presumed to have a lot of legs for the Oscars this year: Mikey Madison in Anora and Carla Sofia Gascon in Emilia Perez. We have Angelina Jolie and Nicole Kidman as sort of mainstays, previous winners who, seem like the kind of people that are like, going to be able to get awards, but that's possible. Maybe they're locked in. And then the next level after that is our girl, Marianne Jean-Baptiste in Hard Truths, Saoirse Ronan in The Outrun, Demi Moore in The Substance, Jen's girl, Cynthia Erivo for Wicked, and then Amy Adams for Night Bitch. And then Fernando Torres in I'm Still Here, Greg's White Whale of a movie that he cannot watch because it is only out.
Does that
in
exist?
Brazil.
That is a movie? Okay.
I mean, she's on the list. She's on the list, and that's the top 10. And so, like, is there a path where either
there's also
Jolie...
Tilda Swinton for
there's Tilda Swinton. I mean, and then June Squibbs at number 12. Zendaya for Challengers is number 13. Like, the list goes on, but I was just trying to cut it off at the top 10 on Gold Derby right now, my favorite website after Wikipedia. But like, is there a world where the, like, let's look at the cumulative career instead of let's give a second Oscar to Angelina Jolie or to Nicole Kidman for their performances, that narrative goes to Demi Moore, and then suddenly that career thing becomes stronger. And I mean, Saoirse Ronan in a weird way also has a, like, is this a career nomination because she's been nominated a bunch? She's getting that mini Amy Adams, who's a mini Glenn Close. Like, wait a minute, why haven't they won yet? Like, what's going on? Like, all that feels messy, like outside of the top 2. Like, it feels like of strong contenders, but like it seems like there's a possibility. That said, I think both Antonio and Greg are right that this is very likely a movie where people are going to be like, what? And the makeup department nominates it, and it gets that one. It doesn't get this had Oscar buzz shutout, but it just gets the one makeup, and that's it. And maybe it wins, and it can be an Oscar winning movie. But I think, there's more. I'm with you, Jen, in that before I saw it, I was like, this is a lot of people just hoping that like this would be a fun story. But, I think there is enough there. And I think the movie is very enjoyable, though I don't know if it's something that can be enjoyable to enough of the Academy in these different categories for her to get him and these other categories to get some recognition.
I'm really tempted to put Coralie Farjat in Best Director prediction.
I mean...
Because I was shocked. So last year, Justine Triet made it in because I was like, they're not going to put any women in here, right? But so if people are conscientious of that, voters, and they're like, scanning the field for like, who's a female director I really like this year? It's possible. And the 5th slot has to be for the token European director. That's all thrown off because Sean Baker won the Palme d'Or. We got Jacques Audiard with Emilia Perez. Like that's not. He's a French filmmaker, but it's a film. I don't know. Like that. I think people are going to get confused about what bucket to put that film in. And then, like Edward Berger for Conclave, potentially. He's also European, but Conclave is about the Vatican. You know what I mean? Like,
people forget that Denis Villeneuve is Canadian and not French. Like he's only from Quebec. but that may feel European enough to them.
I don't know. So I'm just saying, I'm tempted. I don't know if I'll do it, but I'm tempted.
I a long time ago, Jen, maybe the day after I was like, I saw The Substance. Yeah, it's weird. You said you felt it was the Titane. I believe I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah,
lane.
Titan, yeah.
And it very much feels like the Titane lane. I don't know
using
if
my
you
own
all
words
saw
against
that.
me.
That's weirder, but not all that different. So it kind of feels like you could be like, wow, those Europeans like some crazy things, and then say, no, thank you.
Also,
Antonio's shutout does not seem wrong because I believe Titane was shut out.
Also, earlier Brady Corbett movie, Vox Lux, feels like it could be a similar, like, oh, how hard is it for women? But doesn't really connect with anyone. But again, like to look at the rankings, who's above Farge right now in this flawed system that exists? Ramel Ross for Nickel Boys, Ridley Scott, Gladiator 2, Denis Villeneuve for Dune Part 2, and then the seemingly more like locked in Edward Berger for Conclave, Jacques Audiard, Emilia Perez, Brady Corbett for The Brutalist, Sean Baker, Honora. Like, what if the narrative becomes the director of The Substance takes Denis Villeneuve's spot? Like, could that be?
No,
would that be something that would necessarily like shock?
I can't go through that again.
I mean, I don't want to either. As someone who has positions on Dune Part 2 in the movie Fantasy League, I certainly don't want that to happen. But you know, like, is there a path? Again, Antonio is most likely right. But I hear you, Jen. I think there's a path.
It's one cinematic universe. They didn't get into it. It's in the longer screenplay, but the substance comes from baby sandworms. They have a lady who goes and like harvests it and gets the substance out. It's really cool.
No spoilers for Dune Messiah.
Show will clarify a lot of this. Like, you know, you gotta wait. You gotta fill it in.
Here I was about to be like Nora and The Substance, a really interesting double feature, but I think you stole my crossover thunder. All right, Antonio, we've put you through this long enough. Where can folks find you? And I know there's only one place.
They can find me on Letterboxd at Aelefano, Aelefano. Greg, where can find you?
I will be out pumping it up in front of a live studio audience. And then when I get home after, I will be on social media at Ion Cannon, EYEONCANON. Where can people find you?
I will be changing a billboard every day before New Year's to change the countdown to see how close it's coming to the New Year's special. When I'm not doing that, you can find me on Letterboxd at PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF. You can also find the show there at LTR Pod. You can follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review. You can email us, thelongtakereview@gmail.com. Or you can subscribe wherever you are listening to this podcast. Give us a subscription, leave a like, leave a review, leave a rating, do whatever it is that you can do whatever it is you want to do. That helps with the visibility of the show. Jen, where can folks find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI. And on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. And now you've inspired me. I'm like, the Oscar campaign for this movie needs to have in-universe billboards of Sue, just like around LA. If you see that, please let me know.
I mean, that's what they are, right? Aren't they that star who I don't know, but her billboards in all the movies from the 90s? Is that Angelique?
Angeline.
Like that? Angeline?
Yes. She just put up billboards of herself.
Yeah.
Like, she doesn't,
and they burned down in like Volcano in every LA movie.
Yes.
Like that's how I knew them.
There's a Peacock documentary about her if you want to know more.
It is nice knowing that none of us will be on a billboard together.
I speak for you.
Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.